The stars had always looked so calm from a distance, but that night they seemed to tremble. Out beyond the quiet shimmer of constellations, something had shifted, something that would not be forgotten. The galaxy was vast, filled with civilizations older and more patient than humans could imagine. And yet, for all their wisdom and centuries of waiting, none of them understood the fire that burned inside the human heart. The story begins with silence, an uneasy kind of silence. A vast chamber filled with alien voices, each one low and measured, debating, arguing, circling the same point they had circled for decades. To them, time was endless. Waiting was not only natural, it was a virtue. But seated at the edge of that chamber, among creatures who had never known urgency, sat a single human. His fists clenched against the table. His jaw tightened with every passing word. He listened, he tried to breathe, he tried to hold on to patience the way he had been taught. But patience has limits. For years humanity had played along. They had shown restraint even when tested. They had bent to rules written by species who lived for centuries, who measured progress in thousands of years instead of days. To them, what was a delay of 10, 20, even 50 years? A blink. A pause in an eternal life. But for humans? 50 years could be a life entire. 50 years could be a child growing old before their parent returned. 50 years could mean never again seeing the faces you fought to protect. And so, patience was asked of them again. Sit down. Wait. Do nothing. Accept delay after delay while entire human colonies cried out for help in the dark. The aliens discussed protocols, long procedures, endless chains of approval while people suffered. They believed humans would simply endure because that was what humans had always done. But they miscalculated. The human in that chamber, surrounded by alien voices, was not just speaking for himself. He carried the weight of families separated, the anger of soldiers left stranded, the grief of children growing up without parents, the desperation of lives that could not wait another century. He was the embodiment of a truth the aliens had never grasped. Humans lived on borrowed time, and that was their strength. Every muscle in his body trembled as he tried to hold back words that begged to escape. The aliens droned on about patience, about cycles and balance, about harmony that came with delay. His fingernails dug into his palm. He heard their logic, he understood their reasoning, but every word was another stone stacked on his chest. And finally the weight became unbearable. Something inside him snapped. The chamber went still as his voice cut through their endless debate. It was raw, sharp, and full of emotion that the aliens had never expected to hear. He didn't speak with the cold reasoning they were used to. He spoke with urgency, with fire, with grief and fury twisted together. Every sentence hit like a hammer against glass, shattering the calm they had wrapped themselves in. The aliens had always seen humans as adaptable, as clever, as a young species eager to learn. They admired curiosity, resilience, endurance. But what they saw now was different. What they saw was the moment patience ended, the moment a line was drawn. And though they did not understand every word, they felt the weight of it deep in their bones. Humans did not live forever. That was their curse and their gift. Every day mattered. Every lost moment was a wound. And when forced too far, when pushed beyond the breaking point, humans did something no alien could predict. They acted, and they acted with everything they had. The room's silence deepened. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing, their strange features twitching in unease. This was not how things were done in their halls. This was not patience. This was not diplomacy. But none of them could move, none of them could look away because the human's voice carried something far stronger than logic. It carried truth. For the first time, they understood what it meant when patience shattered. For the first time they felt a spark of fear, not of human weapons, not of human armies, but of human will. Outside, in the dark reaches of space, the cries of colonies still echoed. Ships still waited for aid that never came. Families still counted the days, the hours, the moments slipping through their fingers. Humanity's endurance had reached its limit, and the galaxy was about to see what happened when a people who refused to wait any longer finally stood. The human leaned forward, his voice steady now but colder, sharper, the kind of voice that cut through pretense. He spoke of promises broken, of time stolen, of the lives already lost to delay. And then, in a tone that sent chills even into creatures who had never known human fear, he promised that patience was over. No one in that chamber answered. No one dared. The weight of his words hung in the air like storm clouds, heavy and dangerous. And for the first time, the aliens began to wonder if they had mistaken humanity's greatest strength. They had thought it was endurance. They had thought it was adaptability. But what if the true strength of humans was what happened when endurance ran out? The silence dragged on, unbearable. The humans' fists loosened slowly, but the fire in his eyes only burned brighter. He had spoken not only for himself, but for billions waiting in the shadows of forgotten promises. And whether the aliens wanted to admit it or not, the galaxy had changed in that moment. Because once patience is shattered, it can never be pieced back together the same way. And as the humans' last words echoed in the chamber, a feeling settled over the assembly that no one could name but all of them felt, a warning. Something was coming. Something no alien would ever forget. The chamber never felt the same after his words. The echoes seemed to linger longer than sound should have. Even the walls, carved from the stone of a world older than Earth itself, seemed to hold on to the vibration of his voice. The aliens tried to return to their arguments, to the careful rhythm of endless discussion, but it was impossible. The human had ripped open something none of them could patch. He stayed seated, staring across the long table of light, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He did not apologize. He did not withdraw his words. The silence around him was not his burden anymore, it was theirs. At last, one of the older aliens, its skin like folded glass and its voice slow as a falling tide, attempted to restore order. It spoke of duty, of law, of patience being the foundation of peace. But even its calm words sounded hollow. For the first time, they all realized that humans did not measure life in centuries. Every moment stolen was a wound that did not heal. The human thought of his home. He thought of the colony that had begged for relief, of children rationing food while their pleas traveled through bureaucratic corridors of alien councils, delayed by protocols no one even remembered the origin of. He thought of faces he had not seen in years, faces that might already be lost. And as he sat in the middle of creatures who believed time was limitless, he realized they would never truly understand. Patience had been asked of humanity again and again. First, when they joined the Galactic Council, told to learn quietly, to watch, to wait. Again, when they discovered hostile neighbors, told not to provoke, to trust that help would arrive someday. And again, when the colonies cried out for aid that never came, when human ships were trapped in disputed zones, when children slept in fear while the Council's debates dragged on like a river with no end. Each time humanity endured. Each time they held their fire. Each time they believed patience was strength. But endurance can twist into something else when stretched too far. In the dim chamber light he remembered the old stories of Earth. He remembered how his grandmother once told him that humans had always struggled with patience. Waiting was never their nature. From the first fires lit in caves, from the first fields sown, from the first voyages across oceans, humans were always reaching, always rushing against time. They lived knowing the clock was running, and that gave them a drive no alien could copy. Perhaps that was why they were here now, sitting in rooms where arguments outlived lifetimes, surrounded by species who thought they could wait away every problem. They had believed they could adapt, that they could bend their restless nature into something useful. But he now wondered if patience was ever truly theirs to hold. The aliens shifted uneasily. Their colors flickered, their limbs twitched, their silence dragged on. They had never seen a human bare their soul like this. They had seen humans laugh, bargain, fight, and even die. But this refusal to wait, this was something alien to them. Far beyond the council chamber, the colony still lived under strain. One, a mining settlement orbiting a red star, had gone nearly a year without proper supply runs. The machinery was breaking down, oxygen scrubbers failing. Children were learning to sleep with oxygen masks beside their beds. Every message they sent begged for action. Every reply they received told them to hold on. Relief is coming, the messages said. But no one came. Another colony, on the edge of disputed space, lived under the constant shadow of raids. Alien marauders swept in and out, testing defenses, probing for weakness. Humans defended themselves as best they could, but their shields were weaker, their ships fewer, their resources thin. They asked for reinforcements. The council debated, delayed, and debated again. Years passed. Entire generations grew up in fear, never knowing a night of true safety. It was these voices the human carried into the chamber. It was their weight that broke his patience. He could not sit through another cycle of speeches while families on the edge of space begged for someone to act. What none of the aliens understood was that patience is not just a word. It costs something. Every delay came at the price of human lives, human years, human dreams cut short. To creatures who lived 200 years, that price was invisible. To humans, it was unbearable. And now that cost was no longer hidden. The human's voice had exposed it. He leaned back in his chair, silent now, letting his words hang. His heart still pounded, but the fire in him did not dim. He knew he had crossed a line. He knew some of them might never forgive his outburst. But he also knew that silence had done nothing for too long. One alien finally spoke, its voice brittle with unease. It asked why humans could not simply endure a little longer, why they could not hold on as others had before. Its question was meant to be reasonable. Instead, it only deepened the weight in the room. The human turned his eyes toward it, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a quiet voice that carried more power than a shout, he explained. Humans endure storms, yes. They endure hardship, yes. But endurance has meaning only when it leads somewhere. To wait endlessly with no promise of change was not patience, it was death in slow motion. No alien answered. Some lowered their eyes. Some watched him with a new kind of fear. They had expected humans to be young, eager, and pliable forever. Instead, they saw something unbreakable, a truth they could not reason away. Across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. The story of the council chamber traveled faster than the official records. Words carried in fragments, but the message was always the same. A human had lost patience. Some told it with alarm, others with awe. Among the colonies, it became a spark of hope. Maybe, finally, someone would act. Maybe the endless waiting was over. Among the older species, it became a warning. They began to ask themselves what it meant if humans truly stopped waiting. What would they do? How far would they go? No one knew. And that uncertainty was more frightening than any fleet of ships. The human left the chamber that night without another word. He walked the long halls of the council station, his footsteps echoing against the glass floors. He felt the eyes of aliens watching him as he passed. Some with curiosity. Some with suspicion. Some with fear. He ignored them all. Outside the station windows, space stretched endless and silent. He pressed his hand to the glass, staring at the stars that seemed so calm, so distant, unaware of the struggles that burned below. He wondered how many more nights would pass before something finally broke. He thought of his people again. He thought of the colonies, of the families waiting, of the cries that filled his memory. And he knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had not yet seen what humans could do when patience was gone. And somewhere in the quiet, as the alien council prepared to meet again, a decision began to form in his heart. He would not wait. He could not wait. And the galaxy, whether ready or not, would learn what that meant. The council still thought they had time. They still believed they could delay, that the human would cool, that the fire would fade. But they did not understand that once patience is shattered, it is never repaired. The crack only widens. Somewhere ships were being prepared. Somewhere messages were being sent. Somewhere choices were being made that could not be undone. The silence of the chamber was only the beginning. Something was coming. And the stars themselves seemed to tremble. The days that followed felt like a storm pressing against the walls of the galaxy. Whispers traveled faster than ships, faster than official statements, faster than the council could control. Everywhere, from crowded stations orbiting bright suns to the lonely mining colonies in the dark, the same words repeated. A human had lost patience. At first, the council dismissed it as an exaggeration. They told themselves humans had always been emotional, always dramatic. This was nothing new. But the silence that followed the outburst told another story. The chamber had not forgotten, and neither had the witnesses. No one could erase the look in his eyes when he declared that patience was over. It was the kind of look that stayed with you, the kind that made you feel as if something unstoppable had already begun. Back on Earth and in the scattered colonies, the story spread like fire. Families who had begged for help suddenly felt a spark of hope. They repeated his words to one another, not as a warning but as a promise. Patience is over, they whispered in crowded mess halls and darkened bunkers. The phrase turned into something larger than the man who had spoken it. It became a rallying cry. The council met again, of course. They argued over human behavior, over control, over balance. Some wanted to punish the outburst, to remind the humans of their place. Others were uneasy, suggesting that perhaps something had been overlooked. But the debates no longer carried the same weight. Every time they spoke, they felt the shadow of that voice cutting through their words. Meanwhile, the human who had spoken those words walked the corridors of the station with a new kind of silence. He had not meant for his voice to carry across the galaxy, but he did not regret it. Every day more reports reached him, colonies growing weaker, raids becoming bolder, supply lines fraying. He saw the pain building like pressure in a sealed chamber, and he knew it could not hold much longer. The aliens still thought in centuries. He thought in days. The first sign of change came quietly. A transport ship, tired of waiting for official escorts, left on its own. The crew, all human, risked the journey across hostile space with nothing but old shields and stubborn determination. They made it through battered but alive. News of their defiance spread instantly. Soon another ship tried. Then another. The council grew uneasy. This was not the careful patience they had counted on. This was something raw, something restless. They began to see the shape of what might come, and it unsettled them more than open war ever could. The human watched this unfold with a heavy heart. He did not want his people to break away from the council, but he understood why they did. Waiting had become a kind of slow death. Every colony that acted on its own was a reminder that the council's promises were empty. And with each step of defiance, the bonds holding the galaxy together grew weaker. It was not only humans who noticed. Other younger species, who had lived under the weight of endless patience, began to watch closely. They had never dared to raise their voices, but they saw what one human had done with a single outburst. They began to wonder if patience was truly strength or just a cage they had all accepted. The council chamber filled again, but this time the air was different. The aliens spoke more cautiously, their words slower, their gazes often flicking toward the human at the edge of the table. They tried to speak of unity, of cooperation, of order. But no matter how they shaped their words, the undercurrent of fear remained. They were no longer certain of their control. The human sat quietly, listening, his eyes fixed on them. He did not speak this time. He let the silence of his presence press against them. Sometimes silence is heavier than words. And in that silence, the council felt how fragile their authority truly was. Outside, ships were moving. Humans had begun organizing on their own. Fleets were forming in secret, not yet to attack but to prepare, to act if the council failed them again. The sound of engines rumbling in hidden docks carried the same message as his words. Patience was over. Tension grew thicker with each passing day. Colonies that had once begged now demanded. Families that had once hoped now prepared. The line between waiting and breaking was razor thin. The human felt it every time he closed his eyes. He dreamed of voices calling from distant stars, of children clutching their parents' hands, of entire settlements staring into the night sky, waiting for help that never came. Each dream left him waking in a cold sweat, his chest tight, his mind burning with the knowledge that words alone were no longer enough. The council tried one final effort to restore calm. They called a gathering larger than any before, summoning delegates from across the galaxy. They wanted to show strength, to prove that patience still held the galaxy together. But the moment the human entered that vast hall, all eyes followed him. The whispers returned, soft at first, then rising like a tide. They did not see just one man. They saw the symbol of everything that frightened them, and everything that gave hope to others. As the debates dragged on, tension reached its breaking point. Voices rose louder than ever, arguments turned sharp, and fear clung to every word. The human sat through it all, silent, watching. He could feel the moment drawing near, the moment when all the talking would collapse under the weight of reality. He thought of his people one last time, of the colonies, of the endless nights of waiting. And he knew. The breaking point was here. The hall grew restless. Delegates argued, shouted, pleaded. The sound swelled until it was unbearable, a storm of words crashing into one another. And then, without warning, the human stood. The noise died instantly. The entire hall turned toward him. The silence was not peace, it was the sharp silence before something unstoppable begins. Every heartbeat in that room felt like the countdown to something immense. And in that charged silence, the galaxy understood that patience had not only shattered, it was about to ignite. The hall was frozen in silence after he rose. Every gaze locked on him, waiting, fearing, hoping. But before he could speak, the chamber doors opened with a slow, grinding sound, and a new delegation entered. Their arrival was unexpected, unannounced even. The council had not called them. That alone was enough to stir unease. They were not the older, patient races who ruled the chamber. They were not allies known for calm debate. They were envoys from the very marauders who had been striking the human colonies. Their ships had haunted the border regions, stealing resources, leaving scars. And now, somehow, they had been given a place at the council's table. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall. Some delegates leaned forward in disbelief. Others shrank back in alarm. The human's jaw tightened. He knew those markings, those faces. He had seen them on reports, in desperate messages from colonists begging for help. To see them striding confidently into the chamber, treated as equals while human colonies bled, was a wound deeper than words could describe. The council leaders welcomed them with formal bows and measured tones, speaking of peace negotiations, of opportunities to end conflict. They praised patience again, claiming that with time, even the marauders could become partners. But to the human it felt like betrayal. While his people had begged for protection, the council had secretly bargained with those who caused their suffering. The fire inside him, which had already threatened to consume him, blazed hotter. His people had been told to wait, told that help was coming, while their enemies were being courted in hidden halls. The marauder envoys walked slowly to their seats, their eyes never leaving the human. One of them, a tall figure with jagged scars, smiled faintly, a cruel smile of recognition. He had seen humans before, had fought them, had left colonies smoldering. To him, this chamber was a stage and the human was the audience he wanted. The human felt the weight of every colony pressing down on him at once. He thought of the children sleeping with oxygen masks and failing settlements. He thought of the families who had watched the sky in vain for ships that never came. He thought of those who had been lost in raids led by the very creatures now treated as honored guests. And he realized the conflict was no longer just about patience. It was about survival, about dignity, about whether humanity's suffering was to be ignored forever. The council droned on with speeches of unity. But no one was listening anymore. Every word they spoke felt empty against the raw tension in the hall. Delegates glanced nervously between the human and the marauders, sensing something dangerous building. For a long moment the human stayed silent, his fists trembling at his sides. His heart pounded, his throat tightened, but he held the fire inside. He knew one more word from him could shatter what little calm remained. And yet, he also knew silence was no longer enough. The marauder envoy finally spoke. His voice was deep, edged with mockery as he addressed the human directly. He thanked the council for their patience, for their willingness to negotiate, and then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned the human colonies. He spoke of them as though they were bargaining chips, resources to be claimed, tokens on a game board. His words dripped with arrogance, dismissing human lives as if they were nothing. The chamber erupted with murmurs, but the human barely heard them. His ears rang with fury. Each word from the envoy carved deeper into him, each syllable another reminder of the pain his people endured. And then he understood, the council had not merely delayed. They had chosen. They had chosen peace with marauders over justice for humans. The second twist revealed itself with brutal clarity. The suffering had never been an accident of delay. It had been the price of diplomacy. The human's voice, when it came, was low but sharp enough to cut the hall in two. He demanded answers. He demanded to know why his people were forced to bleed while their tormentors were courted as partners. His words carried more weight than any speech the council had ever made. He was not asking for patience. He was not asking for promises. He was demanding truth. The council shifted uncomfortably, their composure cracking. Some tried to speak of greater balance, of sacrifices for long-term peace. But the excuses fell flat in the face of his fury. The envoy smirked again, leaning back with the casual arrogance of one who believed he had already won. But beneath that smirk, something flickered, a hint of unease. For the first time he realized this human was not like the others he had fought. This human did not look at him with fear. He looked at him with fire. The hall trembled with tension. Delegates whispered, some fearful, some emboldened. Younger species leaned forward, their eyes wide, sensing that history was unfolding before them. Older races exchanged nervous glances, realizing the balance they had so carefully built was cracking. The human knew the moment was close. The fragile web of patience and diplomacy that held the galaxy together was unraveling. And he was standing at the center of it. Every word he spoke, every silence he held, pulled tighter on the threads. The envoy mocked him once more, speaking of human impatience as weakness. But this time the hall did not laugh. No one joined in his arrogance. They all felt it, the shift, the danger, the storm on the edge of breaking. The human stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the table. His voice shook the chamber, steady and fierce, as he declared that humans would no longer be bargaining chips. That they would no longer suffer for the comfort of others. That the era of waiting was over, not just for his people, but for all who had been silenced by the endless patience of the council. The hall was silent again, heavier than ever before. The envoy's smirk faltered. The council sat frozen. And in that silence, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The conflict had escalated beyond waiting, beyond patience, beyond politics. It was now a matter of defiance, of survival, of a human standing unbroken against both the council and the enemies they protected. The stars outside burned cold and bright as though watching. The chamber was balanced on a knife's edge. The air felt heavy, like the whole station was holding its breath. The human stood tall, his voice still echoing in the ears of every delegate. The marauder envoy leaned back, scarred face twisted in something between arrogance and unease. The council's leaders looked trapped, their words finally stripped of power. For too long they had hidden behind patience, but now patience itself had turned to fire. The envoy laughed, the sound jagged and cruel. He taunted the human, speaking of colonies already burned, of raids yet to come, of how fragile human defenses truly were. He thought these words would break him, would remind the council that humans were too weak to defy. But instead, the words lit the chamber like sparks on dry grass. The human stepped forward, every movement steady, controlled, but carrying the weight of an entire people. His voice thundered, not just in volume but in force, in raw humanity. He declared that no more worlds would be lost, no more families left to beg for help. He told the envoy that the raids, the cruelty, the arrogance would end, not in time, not in cycles, but now. The envoy rose with a snarl, his hand moving to his side where a hidden blade glimmered in the light. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The council's guards moved, but too slowly. The marauder struck forward, quick and savage. But the human was quicker. He caught the envoy's wrist, twisting with a strength born not of training alone but of desperation, of fury sharpened by years of silence. The blade clattered to the floor. The two locked eyes, close enough to feel each other's breath. The envoy searched for fear in the human's gaze but found none. Only defiance. Only the unyielding fire that had frightened the council from the beginning. The chamber erupted in shouts as guards swarmed. Some tried to pull the two apart, but it no longer mattered. In that moment, everyone had seen it, the marauders for what they were, and the humans for what they truly were. Not impatient children. Not reckless upstarts. But beings who would not be broken, beings who would not wait while their people bled. The envoy was dragged back, furious and humiliated. The council struggled to regain order, but the tide had already turned. Delegates from younger species rose, their voices shaking but strong, declaring they too were finished waiting. The hall that had once worshipped patience was filled with defiance. The chamber walls seemed to tremble with it. The council leaders tried to speak, to calm, to delay, but no one listened. The human's words had become something greater than him. They had become a promise shared by billions. Patience was over. Action was beginning. And then came the twist. As the guards secured the envoy, a transmission lit up the chamber's central display. It was not planned. It was not filtered through council control. It was raw, direct, coming from the edge of human space. The image flickered, grainy but clear enough. A human colony, one of the oldest, standing under the shadow of marauder warships. Explosions burned across the horizon. Children clutched their parents. Families ran for shelters that were already failing. And through the static, one desperate voice carried across the stars. Asterisk, we can't wait anymore. Someone help us. Asterisk. The council froze, horrified. The envoy smiled again, even restrained, believing this was proof of his people's power. But then the image shifted. Another feed cut in, not of colonists pleading but of something else. Human ships, old but determined, launching from hidden docks. Not waiting for permission. Not waiting for orders. They flew in formation, battered hulls gleaming, weapons armed. Their captains shouted into the comms, voices filled with fire. Asterisk, we're not waiting anymore. Asterisk. The chamber erupted again, but this time in chaos. The council leaders shouted about control, about order, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of reaction. Younger species cheered. Older ones whispered in fear. The envoy's smugness faltered as he realized the battle was already beginning, and it was not the one he expected. The human in the chamber stood taller, watching the transmission, his chest tight with pride and fear. His people had chosen. They had decided that waiting was death and action was life. And in that moment, the council understood that the galaxy itself had shifted. The climax crashed into them all at once. Reports flooded in, marauder fleets under attack by human ships. Colonies rising, not pleading but fighting back. Worlds once silent now roaring with defiance. Humanity was not alone anymore either. Other young species, inspired by the human stand, began to move as well, sending ships, breaking free of the council's endless patience. The galaxy was no longer still. It was alive, burning, changing. The council tried one final time to call for restraint. But their voices were drowned by the sound of humans and others, refusing to wait another second. The envoy shouted in fury, but no one heard him. His power was gone, stripped away not by weapons alone, but by the will of those he had thought weak. The human turned to the chamber one last time, his voice steady, filled with both sorrow and strength. He told them that humanity had never wanted war, never wanted conflict. All they had ever asked for was fairness, for action when action was needed, for recognition that their short lives mattered just as much as the centuries of others. But since patience had been used as a weapon against them, they had no choice left but to act. And then came the final twist. As the transmissions continued, a new signal broke through. Not from humans, not from marauders, not from the council. It was from a species long thought gone, silent for ages, watching from the edge of the galaxy. Their message was brief, but it carried a weight that silenced the entire hall. Asterisk, we have seen enough. Humanity's fire is the spark the galaxy has waited for. And we will stand with them. Asterisk. Shock rippled through the chamber. The forgotten species, the silent watchers, had chosen to return, and they had chosen to side with humanity. The envoy's face fell. The council's leaders paled. The younger species rose in thunderous support. The galaxy itself seemed to shift under the weight of this revelation. The human closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the silence before the storm. His people were no longer alone. The galaxy had changed forever. Patience was gone. Defiance had become strength. And what began with one voice in one chamber would echo through the stars for generations to come. The story of the day patience shattered would never be forgotten. Not by the council. Not by the marauders. Not by the galaxy. And certainly not by humanity, who had finally shown the universe what they truly were. The silence after the storm was heavy, as though the universe itself was pausing to acknowledge what had just happened. The alien fleet, once so certain of its dominance, lay scattered and broken across the void. Fragments of their warships drifted silently, still glowing faintly from the fires that had consumed them. The stars around them looked no different, but for humanity, everything had changed. Patience, once stretched thin, had finally snapped, and in that single shattering moment, the galaxy learned what humans truly were capable of. The survivors among the aliens, their ships crippled and their communications fractured, sent out frantic signals of surrender and pleas for mercy. But humanity didn't answer immediately. It wasn't about cruelty or vengeance, it was about making them understand. For too long, the aliens had mistaken restraint for weakness, mistaking humanity's quiet tolerance for submission. Now they had seen what that patience concealed. They had seen what could happen when the line was crossed. On the human flagship, the crew sat in stunned quiet, each person processing what they had just witnessed. Some were trembling, some were crying silently, and others stared blankly at the stars as though trying to grasp the enormity of what had been unleashed. They had defended themselves, yes, but they had also revealed something deeper, something the galaxy would never forget. Human defiance was not a weapon that could be measured in numbers or firepower. It was a force of spirit, sharpened by pain, loss, and the refusal to yield. One of the younger crew members whispered into the silence, almost afraid to break it. Did we really just do that? The question hung in the air. No one needed to answer. The truth was written in the wreckage floating outside their viewports, in the echoes of the last moments of battle. Humanity had made a choice, and the galaxy would carry the memory of it forever. But resolution wasn't as simple as surviving. As the hours passed, the weight of their actions pressed heavier on every heart. Messages came in from distant colonies, voices filled with relief and pride but also with a tremor of fear. The people knew what this meant. No longer would humans be seen as a fragile species trying to find its place among the stars. Now they would be feared, watched, and possibly hated. The aliens who had pushed them this far would never forget, and neither would those who had simply observed from afar. The alien envoy who finally reached them came with words that trembled as though pulled from the throat of someone who had seen too much. They asked for terms, for peace, for a chance to survive. Humanity's leader stood before the envoy, not gloating, not triumphant, but steady. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of all that had just been endured. He told them that humanity never wanted this fight, never sought to dominate or enslave. All they had wanted was to live in peace, to build, to dream, to breathe freely beneath the stars. But when pushed too far, when patience was torn away, they had no choice but to fight back. The envoy listened, their alien eyes filled with something that might have been fear, or perhaps awe. They promised that their people would never again mistake humanity's silence for weakness. And though the words were spoken sincerely, everyone in the room knew that promises could be broken. Yet, for the first time, there was no doubt that those words were not spoken out of arrogance, but out of genuine understanding. In the days that followed, humans across the colonies and ships felt the ripple of what had been done. There was grief for those who had been lost in the fight, grief for the lives shattered and the scars left behind. But there was also pride in the knowledge that they had stood firm, that they had shown the galaxy that humanity would bow to no one. The stories began to spread, whispered at first and then spoken with certainty. When patience was shattered, humanity revealed its true nature, and no alien could forget it. For many, the resolution came not with the surrender of the enemy but with the quiet moments afterward. A child in one of the distant colonies asked her mother why the stars seemed brighter now. The mother smiled through tears and said it was because humans had finally shown them who they were. Somewhere on the battered flagship, an exhausted engineer whispered to herself that maybe now, finally, they would be left in peace. And across countless settlements, people lit small fires, shared meals, and remembered the ones they had lost, holding on to each other as tightly as if the universe itself might try to tear them apart again. The aliens, though defeated, were not gone. They would rebuild, they would remember. And perhaps one day they would return. But if they did, they would come knowing exactly what they faced. The lesson had been written not only in fire and steel but in the unbreakable will of a species that refused to yield. The final twist, however, lay not in battle or in the fear of others, but in humanity itself. As peace tentatively returned, voices rose within human ranks, voices asking what this defiance would mean for their future. Would they become the very thing they had fought against, feared and hated by the galaxy? Or would they rise above it, using their strength not to dominate but to protect, to build, to reach higher than ever before? No one could answer that yet. The path forward was uncertain, filled with both promise and danger. But what was clear, what every human heart now knew, was that they would face whatever came together. Their unity was their shield, their stubborn spirit their weapon. And though the galaxy might tremble at the memory of what had happened, humanity itself carried something more powerful than fear: hope. As the last of the alien wreckage burned quietly into dust, one truth settled over every survivor, every family, every soul who had been part of the struggle. Patience may have shattered, but something stronger had taken its place. Defiance, yes, but also resilience, compassion, and an unshakable will to keep moving forward. The stars stretched endlessly before them, waiting for whatever humanity would choose to become. And somewhere, in the silence of deep space, an alien who had once looked upon humans as fragile creatures whispered a thought they would carry for the rest of their life. They will never forget the day they learned what humans truly are. And as the alien ship drifted back into the dark, it knew one thing for certain: humans were not to be tested again. Patience may shatter, but defiance was eternal. No empire could erase what was learned that day. Patience can break, but humanity never bends.